And the idea behind finding the distance between 2 points is, remember, we have to start with the difference or the distance between the x's. That's one side of a right triangle. So we're using the Pythagorean theorem, which says we have to square sides. So we square and add up. So we'll subtract our x's and square those. Then we'll add it to, we'll do the same thing with the y's. Subtract the y's, square those. Equals, that would equal our distance squared. So to actually find the actual distance, we're going to take the square root of everything at the end. So the first thing that I need to work on is finding the difference between the x's. That's one side of your triangle. Starting out with the second x, so we'll do -3 minus the other x value, which was a +1. And on the other one, we'll look at the y's. So we'll look at the 4 and the -3, always starting with the second point first, which is the -3 minus the first y value was 4. Now we can continue following our order of operations by simplifying what's inside the parentheses. What's inside the first set of parentheses is a -3 minus 1, which will give us a -4. Everything else will stay the same. We'll still square it in a minute, but we're not dealing with the square root yet, just what's inside the parentheses. So then we need to deal with what's inside this second set of parentheses, which is, let's see, a -3 minus 4, which is a -7. Well, in this first piece, if we go back, we've done what's inside the parentheses, so now we just have to deal with the exponents. Well, we've got a -4 squared. Well, -4 squared is going to give us a -4 times a -4, which is actually a +16. Plus, now looking at the second piece, we've got a -7 squared, which is -7 times -7, which is actually going to give us a +49. So the last thing that we can do here is add the 16 and the 49 and see what we get. And we get the square root of 65. And if 65 could be broken down, we'd want to, but it cannot. So we are done, and that's going to be our final answer. And yes, they will not want us to turn it into a decimal, at least not yet. They want us to leave it just as the square root of 65. In this last part, in section 2.1, they want us to learn how to find the midpoint. Again, this is another thing that they love to give a formula, but you really don't need one. A good example would be if I have two numbers, 10 and 20. How do I find the middle? Well, you would probably automatically know that it's 15, but mathematically you find the middle of 10 and 20 by adding them up, 10 plus 20, and dividing by 2, which is 15. You do that because you're finding an average or a middle value between the 10 and the 20. So how do we find the middle of 2 points? Our 2 points, we've got an x1, y1, that's our first point. And we've got a second point, an x2, y2. How do we find the middle? Well, it's going to be another point, and to find its middle of the 2 points, we're going to take the two x values. We're going to do what we did over here. We're going to average the two. We're going to add them up and divide by 2. That's all this formula says, is to find the middle point, we're going to average the x's. And what else are we going to do? We got to do the same thing because we've got y values with the y's. So we'll take the y values and we'll average those as well, meaning add them up and divide by 2. That's what the second part says. So what we're going to do to find the midpoint, our midpoint is always going to be where we average the x's. So we'll average the x's, and then for the y's, we will average the y's. That's all. So it may look like a fancy formula, but that's all we're doing. To find the midpoint, we're going to average the x's and average the y's. So let's take a look. On problem A, we have 2 points, a point P and a point Q, and we want to find the midpoint. Let's call it M. It's still going to be a point, so there'll still be X's and Y's. So to find the X coordinate for the midpoint, we'll take the X values of the 2 points, and we're going to average them, which means add them up, add 10 and 2, and then we'll divide by 2. We're averaging them. Add them up and divide by 2. Well, this means we'll have to do the 10 plus 2 first, which is 12. And then 12 divided by 2 will actually give us a 6. That's it. That's half of our answer. We've got our X coordinate for our midpoint already. Now we need to do the same thing for our Y coordinate. We've got a 4 and a negative 2 as our Y coordinate, so we're going to average them, add them up and divide by 2. So 4 plus a negative 2 divided by 2. Well, first of all, the top says 4 plus negative 2, which is a positive 2. Divided by 2 will just give us 1. So our midpoint is another point. It's the point 6, 1. And that's our final answer. Let's take a look at B. Same idea, though. Let's find the midpoint between the points P and Q. So we'll find a midpoint. Let's call it M. So we'll do the same exact thing we just did in the last one. So we'll find the X coordinate for the midpoint by averaging the 2 X's, which means we'll take the negative 5 and the positive 7, and we're going to average them, meaning add them up and divide by 2. Well, adding them up is going to get us a negative 5 plus a positive 7 will get us 2. Divided by the 2 will get us a 1 as our X coordinate. And that's half done. We've already got the X for our midpoint. Now we need to find our Y. Our Y's are a negative 2 and a positive 3. So just like with the X's, we're going to average them, which means add them up and divide by 2. Well, negative 2 plus 3 is a positive 1 divided by 2. It's just a half. There's no better way to write that. They would want us to leave it as a fraction, not as a decimal, so we're done. Our midpoint is the point